Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be able to share this time again with all of you. I personally really look forward to Sundays. Um, by far, it's my favorite day of the week, and it's largely because of this couple of hours that we get to share and talk about something that's so important to us, and the Tao. What a wonderful thing it is, and of course, Bill in his presentation talked about how it's transformed his life over his years of following the path. And though I have not followed it as long as Bill and Derek have, I certainly have done my best to follow it. And I can testify in my own life to the fact that it has such a positive effect. And I'm so grateful for all of that. And so today, my presentation is entitled Impersonal and Personal. And that, of course, is day 28. And, of course, when Derek wrote this chapter, when he chose the title Impersonal and Personal, he, of course, was referring to the Tao. And the subtitle I've chosen here, of course, is The Duality of the Tao. And, when you think about the word duality, generally it's, I guess, the combination of two opposing ideas, in a sense. And you might say, well, God, that seems kind of, or goodness, that seems sort of at odds. How can something encompass two opposites at the same time? It almost seems like, well, there's a tendency to feel like, well, isn't that some kind of conflict? And it is a kind of difficult concept, any kind of duality, to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. I'm not saying you can't do it. I think we do it all the time. But it's an interesting and odd reality. And so when I read this, and to prepare this presentation, I wanted to try to think of an analogy that could sort of make the idea of something being two opposing ideas at the same time sort of fit. And the best one I could come up with is the one I chose, in which I'll click into my first slide here and talk about. What I thought of basically was the quantum computer. Something that man, of course, is trying to develop. And basically the idea behind a quantum computer is to basically exploit a feature of how the quantum world operates. In a sense, that feature of a particle having what's called a superposition, where it's, in a sense, occupying all its possibilities at the same time. And so in terms of computing power, when you think of that, computers ultimately are a bunch of numbers wafting around inside of a system. That's what a computer is really doing. And the bits are sort of flipped as zeros or ones. And the idea behind a quantum computer is that you can increase its calculative power by having it be both a zero, have each bit be both a 0 and 1 at the same time. And that, of course, it can be difficult to wrap your head around too, but it actually is something that probably at some point is going to come to fruition. And to some degree, is for those of us who follow that, the amount of work that's been done is fascinating. So that's the analogy I could think to bring to it. How can something be two opposite things at once, or occupy two things at the same time? That it seems odd, but that, in a sense, is really what happens. And so I want to start out here now by talking about the impersonal nature of the Tao. And ultimately, the Tao doesn't care the way we humans tend to care. We put so much value on certain things specifically, And that's largely because of our attachments to things, both metaphysical things and physical things. But the Tao isn't like that. It doesn't have that personal connection. And so, some people, the Tao may not necessarily appeal to them in that context because they're looking for something that's personal in a more concrete way. And so I think this is often why people have a tendency to believe in God, and not that there's anything wrong with that. Certainly, we're social beings, and we have a need to have that connection, and there's nothing wrong with it. And in some ways, you when you think about the Tao being impersonal, you think, well, why would anyone want something impersonal to be sort of the governing principle of their life? And that may be a difficult question to answer in the same way that Bill acknowledged that how would you, if someone asked you what the purpose of life is, how difficult would it be to really answer that? And so too it is with this. But I mean, ultimately, the Tao isn't like other faiths in a sense because of the fact that it's not something that's going you give your life over to and that it's going to take care of you. It's going to do something special for you because you've given your life to it. Well, it's not like that at all. I mean, the Tao nurtures and destroys everything, regardless of someone is aware of it or tries to align their life with it or not. The Tao does what it does in a rather impersonal way without a second thought. I mean, if you think of it as a universal intelligence, it does what it does with little attachment or concern. It doesn't care whether you follow it or not, whether you subscribe to the teachings or its reality. And so in that sense, it really is impersonal. So as I said, it both nurtures and destroys everything. And it's not emotional in any way. It doesn't, when I think of, Christianity, for example, and, you hear the ideas of God taking on these, in the story, taking on these sort of human attributes of feelings and emotions. Well, the Tao isn't really like that. It's not personified in any way, so it doesn't have emotion. It doesn't get happy or sad or angry, depending on whether or not we're following the teachings. It doesn't care one way or the other if we do. The Tao goes on and encompasses everything, regardless of whether we're even aware of it or not. And it's this impersonal nature of it that's so interesting, because despite the impersonalness of it, it certainly is a real thing that can have a very personal impact on all of us, and in fact does. And that happens, regardless of you know it by name or not by name, or not. I mean, in other words, the wisdom of the teachings applies to everyone, whether they've heard of or studied Taoism or not. And people, sometimes use other contexts to achieve the same effects. Well, in a way, they're Tao cultivators too. They're just doing it by a different name, which in essence is why it has no name, right? It's another aspect of its impersonalness. It really can't be named in that sense. So, like I said, it doesn't have any emotional aspects, so you cannot make it angry or sad or happy or any other emotion for that matter. Now, to me, and I think to everyone, it's an impersonal force, not a personified deity. And of course, this impersonal thing, it encompasses everything, and I can't help, being the Star Wars nerd that I am, I can't help but bring up the fact of, in the first Star Wars movie from the 70s, when Obi-Wan talks about, when he's explaining the Force to Luke Skywalker, and he says it's an energy that, you know, encompasses everything and emanates from all human living things and so forth. I remember my mother, who knew nothing about Taoism. I don't even think she knew the word, and yet she did. She knew it sort of not by name. But I remember her, after we watched that movie together. I must have been all of about 7 years old. I remember her telling me about how deep that scene was, and the idea of sort of that force, that underlying force that underlies everything. And, you know, of course, to her, she was a Catholic, but yet she was still tapping into that, or at least relating to that idea in the context of, you know, what Lucas wrote in Star Wars. I often think of how that movie impacted her, or the insights she drew from it. And I myself draw those same insights, largely probably because of her sharing hers with me. So that's sort of the impersonal side of the Tao, but of course it also has another side, and that, of course, is its personal side. And so it is very personal in a sense. Well, in what way might it be? Well, since it makes up everything, including us, it's very personal, literally, in that sense. Because, you know, after all, it's within every cell of our bodies. It's within, really, not only of things that are physical, are organic and non-organic, it encompasses everything. I mean, even the inanimate is made up of the form that's, the reason why any form that we see, matter, including us, all of that comes from essentially the Tao. So it's a part of every one of our biological systems. You know, our hearts, our bones, our minds, our circulatory system, all of it encompasses the Tao. I mean, the form that we are arose from non-form, and that non-form, even though it's hard to name, we call it the Tao. And so it flows through every part of us. And because it literally, physically encompasses every layer of existence, I mean, what can be more personal than that, really? And so it does maintain this fascinating duality of being both personal and impersonal, all at the same time. So the Tao is a part of every layer of our existence, whether we are aware of our connection to it or not. So in other words, whether we choose to align ourselves with the teachings and do our best to cultivate them and practice them, really, essentially, it's not like you can escape the Tao, even if whether you know it by name or not, or a name. And it may have many different names to different people. But when I thought of this idea of, you know, the Tao being the way the Tao is, whether we like it or not, or regardless of how we think it is what it is. I couldn't help but think of an experience I had in college, and that was from a professor who I had taken a chemistry class, and when the class came toward the end, I think it was the last day of the class where we would actually be listening to a lecture or whatever, and then I think the final day was the test, and that's it. But what he said is, he goes, you know, as we draw to the end of this class, you may think that, you know, you're done with chemistry now. And what he pointed out is, he goes, you'll never be done with chemistry, because chemistry is everywhere. You know, everything you see in the world came about because of the combination of different chemicals. Everything. I mean, and everything you touch, the air, it all has a chemical component to some degree. And I think of that, you know, concrete physical analogy in chemistry, and I think about how true that is with the Tao. You can never escape it, even if you're not aligned with it. It is what it is. It encompasses everything. So there's no escaping it. It's sort of like being a fish in water. The fish may not realize that that's the thing they exist in. And so too it is with us and the Tao. It's like we exist in it, whether we choose to notice it or not. It's always there. It's always that, both that personal and impersonal reality that's there for us to recognize and notice and make a part of our lives if we wish to make it our purpose. So I'm going to do my best to try to sum it up now. So the Tao is both personal and impersonal at the same time. While this duality may seem odd in the same way that the concept of quantum computing may seem odd, it is fundamentally true. The Tao is both personal and impersonal, all at the same time. The Tao is impersonal in the sense that it does not care in any human way, and it does not have or experience emotions. Ultimately, the Tao is an impersonal force that both nurtures and destroys everything, eventually. Everything is created from it, and everything returns to it in the end. And you think about the most concrete thing we have in front of us, which is the very universe we exist within. Or at least, even if we just talk about the observable universe. Well, we know that that's not going to last forever either. Even our observable universe will reach its end. It'll end up likely cold, empty, and dark. But that's not the end of the Tao, and it's not the end of us either, because we all have a true self that encompasses all the things the Tao encompasses. It can be both personal and impersonal, depending on the context. So the Tao is also personal because it encompasses every part of us, both physically and non-physically. So obviously, as I said, it encompasses everything, every cell of your body, all your organ systems, everything that's physically you. But the other thing is everything that's non-physically you, everything you feel and experience and know that isn't necessarily physically tangible. Those are non-physical things, but that is all the Tao as well. And that's certainly a personal part of us too. In other words, we're more than just physical. We encompass everything. So as Derek points out so beautifully in the end of this chapter of the Tao of Joy Every Day, we are all children of the Tao. And of course, that's because we came from it. Just as we're a product of our parents, and we're all, of course, destined to return to the Tao one day, sooner or later. I mean, it's coming. This current manifestation that we all occupy, it's a transient thing. We know it doesn't last long. On average, it'll last about 70 years. But the part of us that's the Tao is beyond that. That's the part that's eternal, that will return to the Tao. So it is the very essence of both life and death. It's the beginning and the end and everything in between. And the Tao is a part of us, regardless of whether we choose to accept it or not. Just like you can't escape chemistry, so to speak, as my old professor said, so too it is with the Tao. Whether you know it or not, it is the reality that we live in. And I guess that's why it's so important to me, because I've been fortunate enough, thanks to Derek and Bill and Ed and others, who've sort of turned the light on for me and helped me notice it. I mean, it was always there. I think it's always been there, long before I ever heard the word Taoism. But it's in studying it and cultivating it and trying to make it a part of your life that its realness becomes more, you become more aware of the realism of it that was always there to begin with anyways. So that's it. As always, I'd like to end with a book recommendation, The Tao of Joy Every Day, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me today. I hope I said something that was helpful, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Alex, thank you so much. That was it was very thought-provoking for me to to hear explain these concepts, and also it's causing me to think back on recent discussions that you and I have had. So it's a very true statement that you have made about the professor saying that you can't get away from chemistry. There's no point to even try. And I would probably add to that and say that if you think about biology, it's actually the same. The natural laws governing biology quite impersonal. They apply, consistently across different forms of life, including ourselves. So it's kind of impersonal in that sense, and yet biology. I mean, wow, that's how we were born. That's how we live and age and get sick and recover from sickness, get better from being sick, become healthy, and eventually the aging process brings about death, also part of biology. So I can't think of anything that is more intimate and personal than biology, and yet the rules governing biology are not something that cares about my personal well-being. So biology too is both personal and impersonal at the same time.
Yes, Derek, I think you're so spot on. And of course, everything, biology, physics, every subject you could think of. Of course, you could argue is that way because ultimately the Tao makes up everything. And it's definitely a hard idea, I think, to grasp sometimes, but it certainly does seem to apply to everything because the Tao is everything.
Absolutely. And you bring up physics just now, and recently I want to let me just share with everyone that Alex and I have been discussing quantum mechanics a little bit in sort of our own rambling correspondence from time to time. So not to get into the specifics, but I'll just say this. We normally think of quantum mechanics as being very, science fiction and high tech, things that don't seem to have a whole lot to do with we ourselves on a very intimate, personal level. And yet, the discussions that Alex and I have had ranges from quantum mechanics into the nature of consciousness, how it is actually very much part of the equation, so to speak, that in the study of physics, uh, at the quantum level, at the subatomic level and beyond, that we come to a place where consciousness seems to be inextricably part of the picture. And by consciousness, I mean knowing something, understanding something, having that information in the interactions of your thinking. What's that got to do with quantum mechanics? I mean, I started out thinking that everything will work regardless of whether or not there's any understanding happening at the human level. And yet, when I was done with my own personal research, the inescapable conclusion is that everything is conscious. There's consciousness behind everything. Indeed, the whole universe is conscious. As Alex is saying, that's the Tao. The Tao is everything. The Tao is you, the Tao is me, and everything else. So, I can't think of anything more profound than that, something that is universally far-reaching and yet affecting us in the here and now every single day in, indeed, your every thought.